Hello ladies and gentlemen, Fox King here again, and today I'm going to be telling you how to clear the Altar of Ascension. This is a level 55 dungeon in the Valley of Fallen Souls, though his questline doesn't start until a little bit later than that. And there are 7 rooms to this altar. The first and last one are always the same, and the intermediate stages will give you a choice between easy and hard when you clear the previous stage, and you will select it by using either the up or down arrow keys. Anytime you clear an easy floor, you will get 1 Heaven's Medal, and anytime you clear a hard floor, you will get 2, as well as an increased chance to get the material item if you manage to clear the entire dungeon. Now, some of these floors have very specific gimmicks, which will cause you to die very quickly if you don't know what you're doing, so that's why I'm making this guide for you today. So, let's get right into it. The first floor is Attendant Gordic, who has permanent super armor and cannot be grabbed, and has 3 main types of attacks. The first one is a shield bash, which will always stun you if it hits you, and he will occasionally roll out of your melee attacks to follow up with the shield bash, so be careful when doing long strings of melee attacks. He has 2 variants of a sword attack, which you can determine which one he's going to do based on the text that appears above his head. If he says the strong need to learn to endure, then he will do a short range attack, and if he says evil be gone, he will do a long range attack. Now it should be noted that he will always turn around to attack in the direction that you're standing from him, so you must move up and down in order to avoid his attacks. If he hits you with his sword, he can also inflict bleeding. His last attack is a ground slam, where he will charge up with his sword over his head, and once the bar fills the top, he will swing down, and you need to jump to avoid taking damage. Puppeteer Coco comes with 4 dark puppets, which are your targets for this floor. You cannot kill the puppeteer directly due to his incredibly high defense, but if all 4 of the puppets die, he will die along with them. The puppeteer himself will cast confusion on you, so you want to keep him hit stunned along with the rest of the puppets in order to make this fight a little bit easier on yourself. As long as you keep the puppets under control, they should be rather easy, though if they are allowed to split up, they can grow and turn into their tornado form, which can become a problem as you will take damage just by being near them. Sniper Trigger will spend the entire fight in either the far right or the far left of the screen, in which he will turn invisible and do a Kneel the Sniper style attack, which you will need to avoid, and once you find his location and hit him, he will become visible, stop shooting at you, and get a casting bar over his head. It should be noted that Sniper Trigger cannot be grabbed, however skills like Bloody Twister and Neck Snap can interrupt his casting bar and reset it, giving you more time to attack him. Once the bar fills up, he will release a grenade and teleport randomly to the right or the left, which means that he can teleport back to the position that he was just at, in which you will need to attack him again. If you don't find him after a long enough period of time, he will add a normal forward shooting attack on top of the Kneel the Sniper, which will reveal his location. Be careful to avoid the grenade, because that does a significant amount of damage, more so than the sniping attack. One tip to keep track of him if you're having a hard time is to simply use some kind of bleeding or poison effect if you have access to it, as the damage will still show regardless of whether or not he's visible. Black Pig Boo spends most of the fight in super armor and only has 2 real attacks. The first of which is an Ice Breath attack, which has a significant charge up time, so it's easy enough to avoid. He will occasionally roll out of your attacks, which gives him invincibility, but he won't really follow that up with any sort of quick attack, so it's not a real problem. He can also jump into the air, in which he will crash down on your current location at a rather fast speed, so you need to jump in a direction in order to avoid the attack. You will be stunned if you get hit by the shockwave, but he stuns himself when he lands, so if you do manage to avoid it, you have an extra amount of time to attack him, and if you do get hit, he's likely going to stay stunned just as long as you. The main target of Elise's soul is the big rock in the middle, which summons giant fireballs from the sky, Isadora style, and summons a burning zombie anytime they hit the ground. There is also an unhittable Lilith-type ghost in the fight, who will occasionally raise her scythe and say someone is here, in which you are supposed to get behind her and stop moving in order to avoid damage. However, I personally have never actually managed to avoid the damage for this gimmick. I don't know if it's bugged or if I'm simply doing it wrong. I have never cleared this floor, as the damage that you take from it is incredibly significant, and the two gimmicks work against each other, so if you stop moving for the ghost, you'll be hit by the fireballs. I strongly recommend that you avoid this floor, unless you can do enough damage to the boss in a quick enough amount of time to not have to deal with the gimmick at all. Javeliner Yom can be very difficult for melee classes because her primary gimmick is that she throws out a rather large amount of boomerangs, which continuously rotate back and forth along a set path rather than expiring once they return to her. She has a dash forward in which she will do a slicing attack, doing minor damage, and she can dash backwards away from you if you get too close to attack her. She tries to spend most of the fight inside of the path of the blades, which means that it's very difficult for melee classes to hit her without taking significant damage. The Goblin Underminer has an interesting little gimmick where he plants down a mine at random intervals, which will release a giant bomb into the sky. You can hit this bomb back up to keep it from hitting the ground, and when it does eventually hit the ground, it will knock you down, in which you need to quick rebound in order to avoid damage. Though some things like super armor, invincibility frames, or the Knight's Guard passive can make it so that you won't be knocked onto the ground, so if that happens, you need to use some other form of invincibility frames to avoid it. Otherwise, the Underminer will simply throw smaller grenades at you, which you can actually hit back and hit him with, though they don't do much damage, and he will try to shoot you and occasionally tumble out of your melee attacks, which will cause you to fall down and take a small amount of damage. The main danger with the Dark Soul is that he will cause a purple and black aura to appear on you at certain points of the fight, which expires after about 5 to 6 seconds. And if you are not in an invincibility frame skill, when that expiration happens, you will take a very large amount of damage. This can be a very difficult gimmick to handle for classes that don't have long duration invincibility readily available. Otherwise, he can cast super armor on himself and do a bouncing type attack, which can do a rather large amount of damage if you get hit by each part of it. And he can do an elementalist style flame pillar type attack, which you can pull him out of with a throw. Schizo Porbo in his basic form is not a particularly dangerous enemy, only having 2 attacks, one of which is an Ice Nova, which has a brief charge up before releasing it, and it will freeze you if it hits you, and he can throw a fan of 3 knives, which can do minor damage. The main danger of this fight is when he takes a certain amount of damage, he'll split into 3 colored variants of himself. The red one has a strong fire breath attack that it can do. The green one has an ice aura, which will do damage and potentially freeze you at set intervals, and a black one, which can silence you. When you're silenced, you cannot use any skills, including mobility skills such as backstep, and you need to kill all 3 of these enemies before the casting bar over Porbo's original robes fills up. Otherwise, you will take a significant amount of damage, Porbo will put himself back together, and you need to resume the fight. And eventually he will split up into the 3 enemies again once he takes the set amount of damage. Neil and Pan are a pair of Bantu brothers who can only take damage on the extreme sides of the damage scale. So Neil, the bigger brother, can only take damage if you do at least around 75 to 80,000 damage, though I'm not exactly sure on the minimum damage that you need to do. Pan, on the other hand, can only take damage if you do small damage attacks, and I believe his damage cutoff is about 7,500. You can inflict them with bleeding and poison, which will make killing Pan much easier, though it won't help you very much against Neil since he has such a high health pool. If you don't have this kind of damage, you can always just take off your weapon if you're having a hard time dealing damage to Pan. Once you kill one brother, the other one will receive a buff, so be prepared to deal with that once you finish off the first enemy. The 2 mummies on this floor can only be killed with corresponding elemental damages. So the red mummy can only be killed with water damage, and the blue mummy can only be killed with fire damage. Now you can bring their life bars down with neutral damage, though it will take a long time, but the wrappings that they leave behind once they reach 0 life can only be destroyed by the proper elemental damage, and they will die much faster if you use the right damage when attacking them. However, if you hit the wrong mummy with the wrong kind of damage, you will take damage in return, so be careful to only hit the mummy that is weak to the element that you're using. Otherwise, they just throw lightning bolts at you and hit you around a little bit, but they're relatively slow, so they shouldn't be much of a problem as long as you have the proper elemental damage. If your class doesn't naturally have this kind of damage, you can use Jack Frost Flasks and Salamander Flasks to make this an easy fight. Luminous Enandron is the boss of the Altar of Ascension and has two main gimmicks that you need to be aware of. The first one is that he will activate one of two auras regularly throughout the fight. Both of these auras have a large outer ring, and one of the variants has a smaller inner ring, which you need to stand inside of in order to avoid taking damage, which is a good time to hit him with melee attacks. And the other version is that he will get a red aura underneath him rather than the smaller circle. You need to stay out of this red aura, but still remain inside of the outer ring in order to avoid taking damage. Otherwise, the other thing that he does is that he will pick you up off of the ground, in which you will get a meter next to you, and you need to keep the X indicator in the blue zone by holding down and releasing the X button so that it doesn't move into the red. Now, don't rapidly press the X button, otherwise it will simply fall to the bottom. It's hold and release. Also note that the sensitivity sometimes changes, so be ready to deal with that, but with enough experience, this shouldn't be a hard gimmick to mitigate. If you fail, he will throw you to the ground and you will take significant amounts of damage. Otherwise, the only other thing that he does is he will create these bubbles on the ground, which explode after a period of time, but they tend to last long enough that you can move out of the way before they explode, so they're not really that dangerous. Once you beat Enandron, he will tend to drop about 4 to 5 Heaven's Medals, and if you cleared enough hard floors, you may receive a material item for clearing the entire dungeon, which you can trade into Simona to refill the conversion charge meter on pink magic sealed items. So if you've already converted it 10 times and didn't get what you wanted, you use this item to give yourself another 10 chances to convert it to a stat that you want. So, that is all for the Altar of Ascension. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like if you learned something, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and also check out my other videos if you still think that you have a little bit to learn about the game. Most of my videos so far are tailored towards newer players, but hey, you never know when you can learn something interesting. So again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.